You've been there, whether it was at the CIA or the Defense Department, interpreting reports such as we're getting out of Ukraine right now, where we think about Clausewitz and the fog of war. How significant do you think this is from what you've heard?
I think it's a very significant moment. I would say it's both pivotal and dangerous. It's pivotal because to have Ukraine conducting a strong offensive that's working is incredibly important to putting real pressure on both Putin and the Russians. And that takes me to the dangerous point, which is that it's dangerous because Putin, if he's boxed in, obviously will have to strike back. There are Russians who are criticizing him now in Moscow because of this retreat that's taken place. And the real issue is whether Putin now strikes back. He already has hit back on the infrastructure. Whether he resorts to more, including the possibility of battlefield nuclear. All of that creates a dangerous moment here. But I think this is a very critical moment in which the Ukrainians have to consolidate their advances, hold that territory, and make clear that they are without question a force to be dealt with.
So you really went to the essence of it. What is possible within his capability for President Putin to do here at this point? Does he have the resources in terms of troops and tanks and artillery to go back in and reclaim this territory? Or might he have to resort to other things, such as you mentioned, tactical nuclear or even chemical weapons?
Well, there's no question that the impact of this offensive tells us how the Russians have largely been depleted. In terms of both their forces and their equipment. This offensive has moved very quickly. The Russians are retreating quickly. It's not something you can turn around on a dime. And even though they're retreating for the purpose of regrouping, I think it tells us a lot about the ultimate weakness in the Russian force that I think indicates that if the Ukrainians can continue this offensive, get the assistance that the United States needs to continue to provide, not only from the United States, but from NATO. This could be a moment in time when we will look back and say this was the turning point in terms of the war in Ukraine.
Mr. Secretary, do you have a sense of what is the most important assistance we either are providing or could provide? We tend to think of in terms of weaponry, like those HIMARS says some things, but it also may be intelligence, something you know terribly well.
Well, there's no question that I think intelligence sharing is critical, particularly when you're engaged in an offensive. You got to know where the enemy is, and you have to know what is the state of their force and whether or not as you proceed with the offensive, that you can, in fact, not only gain territory, but retain that territory. So intelligence and intelligence sharing is going to be critical. In addition to that, I think the ability to have long-range missile capability to be able to strike at the Russians as they retreat, keep the pressure on. This is a moment when you cannot kind of sit back and not continue to push forward. So I would say there's two important things for the Ukrainians to do at this moment. One, consolidate the gains that have been made, and secondly, continue to put pressure on the Russians.
It's early going, and there's a long way to go without a doubt. At the same time, it may not be too early to anticipate how does this end. Let me give you a hypothetical, for example. If, in fact, the Russians got pushed back to where they were before February 24, is that a time for possible negotiation?
The key has always been what will Putin ultimately decide? And the key to Putin is to put leverage on Putin. You've got to show him that there is a continuing price to be paid for remaining in Ukraine. And that's what the Ukrainians are doing. So now the issue becomes, does Putin decide that this is a moment to declare a ceasefire and recognize that that this is not a war that Putin can win? And so he's got to negotiate an off-ramp at this point. Or does Putin dig in because he's now in a box and continue to strike back? That is the fundamental issue that will decide where we go from here.
But I would think, Mr. Secretary, that in fact, let's assume, and this is a huge assumption, that Mr. Putin was interested in a ceasefire. If I were President Zelensky, I'd say, well, wait a second. We have a ceasefire that gives you, Russia, an opportunity to regroup. What guarantees you're not just going to do it again 6 months from now, a year from now?
Well, I think that's what President Zelensky has to decide as head of Ukraine. Whether or not a ceasefire can pay off in trying to consolidate the wins that the Ukrainians have made and try to hopefully be able to emerge into an approach that moves us away from this constant warfare, or whether or not the Ukrainians are going to continue to put pressure on Russia and push them out of Ukraine, in which event we're dealing with a much longer war. That's a fundamental decision, and that decision rests with President Zelensky.
Finally, Mr. Chairman, let me turn to a very different subject, and that is the passing of Queen Elizabeth II and the succession of Charles III as king. As I said, you served, among other things, as White House Chief of Staff for President Clinton. Give us your perspective on, as President Biden goes over this coming weekend to attend the funeral, the significance of that for the Biden presidency. What do you do when you're in the White House trying to really handle something like that the correct way for the United States?
I think the most important thing at this point is to make clear that the United States and Great Britain are strong allies. And I'm glad that President Biden is going to go to the funeral. I think it'll be an opportunity to meet with the king, to meet with other officials there, and to renew the strength of that alliance. It is very important right now that we maintain stability in the relationship and ensure that even now with the king, that we can build a very strong relationship with Great Britain that can not only help us in terms of promoting peace and dealing with Russia, but also can bring the European community together as we have in unity. This is a moment in time where I think the United States and our allies, particularly in Europe and particularly with Great Britain, this is a moment where that kind of unity can make a real difference as far as how we deal with our adversaries.